Alrighty guys, so we're going to start measuring the engine now. Some tools that you're going to need are some micrometers, preferably 2 to 4 inch micrometers. So it'll be 2 micrometers, one is 2 to 3 and another one is 3 to 4 like this one. And you're also going to need bore gauges that, that fit the bores that you're going to use. So I have an entire set. The other thing you're going to need is a pen and a piece of paper so that you can log your measurements. So the first thing that I'd like to explain is how you're supposed to measure things. Here, let's see if you can see that a little bit better. So what you're wanting to do when you do this is measure the inside diameter of the bore in 3 points. You want one straight here, and then the other two need to be 120 degrees off of this straight line. Now the purpose of this is to check for oblong or out of round of your cylinder. For this engine, you can be 3/1000ths out of round, which means either of these lines can be can have a difference of 3/1000ths from this one. So that's the deal there. Now you want to do this in at least 2 positions down the depth of the bore. So over here I have it laid out. So ring ridge is the first one you're going to do. The ring ridge is this spot up here. Then you're going to take a measurement just underneath the ring ridge, and then you're going to take one down here at 3 at the bottom of the cylinder. I have another one in here because I like to take 3 measurements just to be like extra super careful. So the reason you do these measurements down the depth is to check for taper. The spec for this engine is 5/1000ths, so the measurement from this first measurement here can be different by 5/1000ths from this third measurement. So the wear from your piston rings can cause your cylinders to kind of cone out, and if they cone out for more than 5/1000ths, you're going to have to get your cylinder bores bored out. So that's just kind of how you do it. Well, this is kind of the pattern that we're going to use to measure everything. Now for this engine, these cylinders are spec'd OEM at 3 inches and 750 thousandths of an inch. So 3.750 is the measurement of these bores. This is piston number 4, or this is cylinder number 4, and what we're going to use is a 3.5 to 6 inch inside bore diameter. We're going to go inside of it. We're going to click it open, and we're going to try to get this as close to 90 degrees to everything as we possibly can. So we want it 90 degrees to the deck, we want it 90 degrees to the walls, we want it 90 degrees to the sides. We just want it perfect, really. And then we're going to lock it slightly. Oops, sorry. And then we're going to keep one side motionless, and we're going to move the other side around. Now what we're doing when we're doing this is checking for kind of high spots. So if you are moving it around and then you can't really move it down at all, like you can't move it down or up at all, it means that you have this too tight. So you kind of loosen it up a little bit, move down a little bit, kind of tighten it up, then you check again, and so yeah, that one's pretty perfect right there. See, I can move it around quite a bit, but it's always somewhat touching the cylinder wall, at least when it gets at its closest. So we're going to call this good, and then we're going to take our micrometer here, and we're going to set it down because this is really hard to do in your hands. So this is a locking mechanism. This is locked, this is unlocked, and we have to unscrew this. Now since it's around 7th, I know kind of where it needs to be initially. Come on, come on, come on. Let's go. And that should be pretty good right there. And oop. Yep. Okay, so when you're doing this, you want to use the little thimble here at the end. This is a ratcheting deal. It kind of has its own torque deal on it, and it'll click. And when it clicks, that means that you've got it as tight as you need it. Because with these spring deals, if you try to use this large thimble here, you can compress it, and then your measurement's going to be off. So we have it clicked. Now we're going to lock it. I'm going to remove the bore gauge just so that we don't drop the thing. And now we're going to read this out. So this is a 3 to 4 inch micrometer. So what you're going to have to do is any measurement you get here on the thimble, you're going to add 3 inches to it. Now the way this works is, let's see if I can get it so that you can see this really well. Yep. So these large numbers here, these are hundredths of a thousandth. So we're at 7. 7's the number we can see, so that's 700 thousandths. Now, the hash marks in between these large numbers are 25 thousandths. So we can see 2 of those hash marks past the 7, so that's 50 thousandths. So now we're at 750 thou. This thimble here, every rotation of this is one of these small 25 thousandths marks on here. So this whole deal is 25 thousandths, and it marks it out in half a thousandth. So there are 50 marks on this thimble. This one is at, so that's 0, 1, 2, just past 3. There are 6 marks that you can see, so that's just past 3. So now we're at 753 thousandths. And now what we're going to do is move on to these small numbers here with these lines. These are 10 thousandths. And what you're going to try to do is match up one of these lines perfectly with one of the lines on here, and that will give you your 10 thousandths mark. So let's take a look. It's just past the 3, so this is perfectly lined up with the 2. So it's 753.2 thousandths. That's the measurement there. So let's go over this again. These large numbers here are hundreds of a thousandth. The marks in between these are 25 thousandths. The thimble marks each of these 25 thousandths. So the numbers that go around this thimble are one of these hash marks in between the 100 thousandth marks. And it is marked in half a thousandth. So there are 50 marks on the thimble. And these lines right here are 10 thousandths. So each one of these is a tenth of a thousandth. So that is kind of how you read a mic. It's basically just what you see and what you can line up and kind of read it out. A lot of mics don't go down to 10 thousandths. They'll just go down to a 1,000th. But you know, with different brands, you get different deals. So that's the measurement I got for there. So now that you know how to use a mic, know how to use the bore gauge, you just have to measure each of these points here, here, and here. The handy thing about this is that these head bolt holes here, these pretty much mark it off really well for 120 degrees off of this measurement right here. So you just line it up with these bolt holes and you'll be pretty close to where you need to be. The other thing is you put it in the cylinder wall. You want it to take a measurement. Well, I'll take a measurement down here in the middle and then down here at the bottom. And you'll still have to do the three-sided deal. So that's how you do that. Now this engine also has a ring ridge. It's this little lip here that you can see. It's not big. It's actually pretty minute. And I'd also like to measure that. So I can just do the same steps. Oops. Yeah, see, that's the problem with these is they're straight up springs. so they like to shoot out on you. So you do the same steps, but you just keep it on the ring ridge, and that'll just tell you how wide your ring ridge is. Once you have the measurement for your bore, then you can take the measurement for your ring ridge, and that'll tell you how much of a ring ridge you have. For this engine, I have about 1.5 thousandths of a ring ridge. So I've already measured everything and ordered the parts. So we're not going to do the time lapse like I said we would, but that is how you measure the cylinder bore. So now we're going to move on to the main cap. Okay, so these are the main journals, or what I refer to as the main journals. Now, measuring these is pretty much the exact same process as measuring the cylinder bores, except for there are only two measurements you need. So you have to measure here, here, and here, and you have to measure in the front, and you have to measure in the back. And it's for the same deal, to check for oblong and to check for taper. I can't remember how far out you can be on this one, but I can't imagine that it would be more than 1,000th. This is a pretty important part of the engine, and if this is off at all, you're going to get super vibrations at the minimum. Now, in order to put this on, you're going to need a torque wrench. So, this is a torque wrench. It is basically just a large ratcheting wrench. It has a half-inch, deal on it. I forget what those are called. And it allows you to tighten bolts to a certain pressure or torque. This is a 25 to 250 pound torque wrench, so I can torque things down to a maximum of 250 foot-pounds with this and a minimum of 25 foot-pounds. The caps on this engine need to be torqued down to 80 foot-pounds, but you have to do it in a series. So you have to torque both bolts down to 40 foot-pounds, then down to 60, and then down to 80. They do this so that you don't end up with one side being all the way torqued down and then the other side not being able to move down, because as you can see, this is a very tight clearance fit, and if it gets cockeyed at all in there, it's going to be really hard to get out, or really hard to get in there. So yeah, that's really the deal with this. For this particular torque wrench, in order to twist the thimble, you have to unlock a little locking deal, and twisting it clockwise tightens it, bringing the torque up, and twisting it counterclockwise loosens it and brings the torque down. This is a click type torque wrench, so when you get to your torque, it'll click, meaning it'll just kind of break its tension. I do assume that that's what this break in the bar is so that when you get to a certain torque, here, let me see if I can demonstrate. Oops. We're gonna get that down to 0. Okay, let's see if I can do this by hand. Ooh, nope, I can't do it by hand. Okay, so it's a click type torque wrench, which means when you tighten it, you hear that? That means that you've gotten to your torque. I have this at 25 foot-pounds right now. This is already torqued down to 80, so it just breaks loose. And after you break it loose, you can still tighten the bolt. So it's kind of by feel deal. If you're not paying attention and it goes past the click and you keep pulling, you're going to over-torque the bolt. So when it gets to the click, just make sure you stop immediately. Something that I like to do is click a few times, so I'll get to torque and do something like that, just to make sure that it's really torqued down. The other thing with a torque wrench is that you do not want to pull on it anywhere but from right here. If you pull at it from down here, you're going to change the way that the torque spec works. Well, you're going to change the amount of leverage you're putting on it, and you're going to mess with the torque reading. So that's the deal there. So when you're using a torque wrench, always pull from here, and do not ever use any kind of extra leverage to do it. If you do, you're going to affect where it's torquing from, what it's reading. So just don't mess with these in any way, shape, or form. They're pretty much a precision measuring tool. They're accurate to plus or minus 14 foot-pounds, even the expensive ones. And if you try to increase your leverage or whatever, you're going to throw it off. So that's basically how you use a torque wrench. Okay, so to measure this bore, you're going to need a 2 1/8 to 3 1/2 bore gauge and a 2 to 3 inch micrometer. So it's a little bit smaller than the cylinder is. And like I said, it's the exact same process. You go in. Oop. I think that I put this one in the wrong spot. Let me go get the correct bore gauge. Okay, here's the right one. So it's the same exact process. You want to measure here. Oops. Here. And here. When you're measuring this way, just make sure that you don't throw the plunger down into the oil gallery there. It's going to be a little bit hard to get it out. And like I said before, you want to do it in the front and in the back, and it's the same technique. You get it in there, and you try to find a spot that's, you know, pretty good, pretty 90 degrees to everything, and then you lock it, and you keep one point stationary, and you move it around, and you try to find the point at which it's closest to the opposite side, and then you let it loose, and you tighten it up again, and you keep trying, and right there, it's pretty much perfect. So that's how you measure the main caps. Now, a little show and tell here on the main cap. Okay, so here's a little show and tell bit. When I was cleaning, well, actually, when I was taking the rear main seal off of this number 7 cap, I was using a punch and I broke a piece of the metal off. Now, I didn't realize it until I went to clean this, and I saw a little hairline crack in there, and I started picking at it, and a piece of the metal fell out. Now, this is not as huge of an issue as it may look. All this is doing is holding on the rear main seal, and the best that I can do is put some JB Weld in there after it's all put together and hope that it doesn't blow the main seal out. It is not affecting the bearing journal in any way. And besides, I couldn't repair it even if I wanted to. The deal with main caps is that they are mated to their block. If you break a main cap, the block is junk. You have to throw it away. You can't you can't replace main caps because when they make them, it's basically solid metal, and they bore the whole thing out in one shot, so that these are all straight in line with each other, and so that the main caps and the block itself are kind of in a perfect circle. So yeah, don't break your main caps, and don't try to replace them. You're gonna break stuff if you do. So that's the deal there with the main caps. Let's move on to the cam journals. Okay then, so this is a cam journal. You're going to be using the same bore gauge that you used for the main journal, but you're going to use a smaller micrometer. Now, the deal with cam journals is that they progressively get smaller the closer to the back of the block you get. And the reason for this is because they don't have caps like the main journals do. So in order to get the camshaft in fairly easily, they've tapered the bores down. That way it's easier to get, you know, the first lobe, the first journal of the cam through these first 3 bores, rather than trying to fiddle with getting each one into a perfectly sized bore for it. So that's the deal there. I'm not really going to demonstrate, you know, measuring all of it, because I've already shown you twice, and it's the exact same process. Now the deal with this is that generally how you mess with cam bearings is you get a cam bearing install tool or removal tool, you know, whichever it's called. You can rent them from some places, or you can buy them, but apparently they're fairly expensive. I don't have one, couldn't find one to rent, and so what I ended up doing, and this is not recommended, but it can be done, is I took a hacksaw and I kind of slowly sawed away at the bearing until I got it to a very, very almost paper thin, you know, point. I didn't go all the way through the bearing. And then I took a punch, and making sure not to touch the race, I punched out the bearing. Now what this does is it allows the material that you're punching to be pushed out and for it to split as it's coming out, which makes it so that the bearing kind of squeezes a little bit and makes it easier to push out through the bore. I don't know if you can see that, but I did nick the journal. I can't get it out. I'm hoping that it'll be fine, but yeah, that's something that you really want to avoid. I was a little bit more successful on that second one. I still have 2 more of them to do. It's a really tedious process. You do not want to rush through this, because if you go all the way through this bearing and you hit that journal, you just ruined your engine, because you cannot fix this. I suppose that you could bore it out, but you would have to get specialty bearings forever after that. So that's the deal with the cam bearings. So yeah, that's basically everything that I needed to have measured. Generally, what you would also do is measure the how flat the deck of your block is. I didn't do that because I'm putting the same head back on it, and I can't afford a new head, and I can't afford to have it milled, so there's really no point in measuring it if I can't fix it, right? So you would do that, and you would also measure the, what's it called? The valve stem guide. You would measure that just to make sure that there's not a whole bunch of slop in there for the valve stem to rattle around in. And that would be something that you do with the head. And that's a really small hole. That's like the size of one of these little bolt holes that you can see around here. It's like the size of one of these. Maybe a little bit bigger than that, but that's about the size of it. So generally that's what you would do. I'm not going to do it because I can't do anything with that information. So it's basically just measure what you have to measure, because if you can't do anything with the information that you've gained, you're just wasting time. So yeah, that's measuring. So I guess now we're going to move on to the transfer case, which I've already gotten done, but it's not really going to look like that when you see the video. All right, let's get to it.